I was out in my backyard in Knoxville a few months back, just trying to tighten a loose bolt on the riding mower, when the reality of my age finally caught up with me in a way I couldn't ignore. I had spent 30 years supervising logistics and moving heavy freight in warehouses, and I always took pride in being the man who didn't need a hand with anything. But that Saturday, I went to stand up from a kneeling position on the grass, and my legs just wouldn't do the job. It was like the connection between my brain and my thighs had been cut. I had to grab onto the muddy fender of that mower and heave myself up with my arms, my knees shaking like a couple of old bridge timbers in a gale. I stood there for a minute, heart hammering against my ribs, looking at my legs and realizing they looked thinner than I remembered. It wasn't just that I was getting older, it felt like I was disappearing from the bottom up. That evening, I ran into an old foreman I used to work with, a man named Silas, who's a few years older than me. Silas had always been a bull of a man, but when I saw him at the hardware store, he was using a walker and moving with a kind of hesitation that broke my heart. We got to talking, and he told me he'd waited too long to take his muscle loss seriously. He told me the doctors call it sarcopenia, but to him, it just felt like losing his seat at the table of life. He'd spent a fortune on those giant tubs of protein powder you see in the health stores, those fancy shakes with the bright labels and the promises of instant recovery, but he told me they hadn't done a lick of good for his strength. That conversation stayed with me all night. I didn't want to end up like Silas, staring at my own feet and wondering where my life went. I decided right then that I was going to find a better way. I started looking into the real science of how a man over 60 actually keeps his muscle. I didn't want the marketing fluff or the expensive supplements that Silas had wasted his pension on. I wanted the truth. I found out that there are 6 specific humble foods, some of them costing barely $1, that actually work better for our aging bodies than any processed powder ever could. Our bodies at 73 just don't recognize those chemical mixes the same way they recognize real food. I've spent the last several months putting these 6 things to the test, and the change in how I move has been enough to make me a believer. I'm going to walk you through all of them, especially the one that costs less than a cup of coffee, but can actually flip the switch on muscle growth again. The first thing I had to change was my skepticism about Greek yogurt. For years, I just thought of it as a diet snack for folks trying to lose weight, but I found out that for someone like me, it's a powerhouse. Researchers at a place called McMaster University found that seniors who eat this stuff daily can actually keep their muscle mass even when they aren't as active as they used to be. The secret is something called casein protein. It's a slow-burning fuel that feeds your muscles for up to 7 hours after you eat it.
At our age, our muscles are a bit stubborn. They don't just grab protein and use it in a big burst anymore.
They need a steady trickle. My friend Sam, who's 72 and lives over in Maryville, was complaining about his legs feeling weak and cramped up every night. I told him to start having about 3/4 of a cup of plain Greek yogurt every day. I told him to let it sit out for 10 minutes before eating it to let those live cultures wake up, which helps an old stomach digest it better. 2 weeks later, he called me up saying his legs felt steadier than they had since he retired. But even that didn't prepare me for the shock of what I learned about canned sardines. Now, I know some of you are probably wrinkling your nose just hearing the word, and I was right there with you. But for about $1 a can, you're getting 23 grams of complete protein and a massive dose of vitamin D. I found a study from the University of Western Australia that really set me straight. They took a group of seniors and had them eat sardines just 3 times a week. In only 2 months, their grip strength improved by 28%. That's a bigger jump than most people get from lifting weights for a year. The omega-3 fats in those little fish are like oil for a rusty engine. They lower the inflammation in your muscles so the protein you eat can actually get in there and do the work. My old work buddy Bill, who's 68 and had been terrified of losing his balance, started mashing them up with a bit of avocado on crackers for lunch. He told me that fishy feeling went away once he added a squeeze of lemon, but the strength stayed. He feels like his feet are finally gripping the floor again. Then I had to face the truth about eggs. We spent decades being told to throw away the yolks, but I found research from the University of Connecticut that proved we were being told wrong. They found that eating the whole egg triggers 40% more muscle growth than just eating the whites. That yolk contains something called phosphatidic acid, which is basically the on switch for your muscle growth. As we get older, that switch gets stuck in the off position, and whole eggs are what turn it back on. I read about a 12-week study where seniors who ate 3 whole eggs a day gained nearly twice as much lean muscle as folks drinking expensive protein shakes. I started having my eggs soft-boiled in the morning, leaving the yolk just a bit runny so the vitamins stayed intact. I have a cousin named Larry who's nearly 80 and was getting so frail he could barely carry his own mail. I got him on a routine of eggs and spinach every morning. The nitrates in the spinach help the blood flow, getting that egg protein right to the muscles. Larry told me he feels like he's got a spark back in his step that he hasn't felt in a decade. One thing that really surprised me was the power of black beans. I always liked them in a soup, but I never knew they could help reverse muscle loss. A study from Harvard showed that folks who eat beans daily have higher levels of growth hormones even after they hit 60. It's about the gut muscle axis. If your stomach isn't healthy, your muscles won't be either, and the fiber in black beans keeps that whole system running right. They cost less than 50 cents a cup, but they provide a steady stream of amino acids that keep your muscle synthesis going for hours. My neighbor Joe, who's 76 and loves his woodworking, was worried he was losing his endurance. He started swapping out his white rice for black beans and brown rice. He told me he doesn't get that afternoon crash anymore. He feels like he's got the fuel to stay in his shop all day if he wants to. It's a simple, cheap way to protect what you've built over a lifetime. I also had to look at what I was doing right before bed. I learned that the time we sleep is actually the most dangerous time for our muscles because that's when the breakdown usually happens. I found a study from Florida State University that showed seniors who eat cottage cheese before bed gained 60% more muscle mass than those using shakes. It's that casein protein again, working while you're dead to the world. It also has a compound called CLA that actually blocks the enzymes that try to steal your muscle away. I started having a cup of full-fat cottage cheese about an hour before I hit the sack. I have a friend named Frank who's 74 and was waking up feeling stiff and weak every morning. He started this routine, mixing in a little ground flaxseed for the healthy fats, and he told me he wakes up feeling like his joints and muscles have been recharged. He doesn't have that hollow feeling in his arms when he first gets out of bed anymore. Finally, I have to talk about lentils. For just a few pennies, these little things can actually rejuvenate your muscle cells from the inside out. There was a trial at the University of Sydney where seniors replaced their protein shakes with lentils and showed better energy production in their muscles, almost like they were 20 years younger. Lentils have something called spermidine that helps your body clear out the old damaged cells and grow new ones. I started cooking them in bone broth to get those extra amino acids for my joints. My neighbor Arthur, who's nearly 70 and was worried about his energy levels, started having lentils for lunch a few times a week. He told me he feels like his battery stays full much longer now. He's back to walking his dog for 2 miles every morning without needing to sit down the moment he gets home. Standing here today at 73, I can tell you that the fear I felt that day in my backyard is gone. I don't feel like I'm disappearing anymore. I went back to that mower last week and I stood up from that same kneeling position without even thinking about it. My legs felt like they were made of solid oak again. You don't need a pantry full of expensive powders, and you don't need a complex diet that makes you miserable. You just need to understand that your body is a machine that's been running for over 60 years, and it needs a specific kind of high-quality real-world fuel to keep the parts from wearing out. Yeah, I've seen too many men like Silas give up because they thought the decline was inevitable or because they tried the expensive stuff and it didn't work. I'm telling you, it's not too late. Your muscles are just waiting for a reason to stay. If you give them these 6 foods, you're giving them that reason. You're giving yourself the chance to stay independent, to keep your balance, and to keep being the person your family relies on. It's about the freedom to move through your own life without fear. I'm going to stay right here in Knoxville, keeping an eye on my own strength and making sure my plate is doing the work it needs to do. I hope you'll join me in this. Take one of these foods, just one to start with, and add it to your routine this week. Maybe it's the eggs in the morning or the cottage cheese at night. Just give your body that $1 investment and see what happens. You're worth the effort, and your strength is the foundation of everything else you want to do with these years. Take care of yourselves and remember that we aren't just getting older, we're getting stronger if we choose to be. I'll be right here, and I'm looking forward to hearing how your legs feel a week from now.